Hi, I'm Alexa Ray Corriea, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook podcast. I had the great privilege today to interview my friend Abubakar Salim of Surgent Studios. You might know him as Bayek from Assassin's Creed Origins, or his role in Raised by Wolves, and the upcoming season 2 of Game of Thrones House of the Dragon. We talked about the success of Tales of Kenzera Zao, what it takes to build a game studio, the trials and tribulations of building that game studio, and how you build something with heart and how to chase that feeling when you're developing a game. I find his story so inspiring. And I think if you're someone who has been in games for a long time or is looking for a way to sort of break in and start their own thing, I think this is the conversation you'll want to listen to. Please enjoy.
No, I'm going to offer you this game, a game from my old man. I hope you like it.
Oh, nah, this looks wonderful.
I love it. I want it. I love it.
Oh, hell yes.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
You should not sneak up on people, young shaman.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Ooh, damn, bro.
See, like, this is what we mean when you're like, can we please see something different?
My guy, how are you? How are
That's
you?
like such a question. I don't know where to start, man. Yeah, no, I'm good. I'm like, I feel good. I'm kind of also terrified, excited. I'm everything, man. Like it's emotional. It's very emotional.
Yeah, you are the busiest man in the business right now.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
I feel it. I feel it. I do feel it. It's one of those ones where I'm like, I don't know. I'm just sort of in this place of like, oh, okay, this is all happening all at once. Do you know what I mean? And that's sort of, and that's okay, you know, and it's all good. And I feel like it's, again, I don't want to necessarily say like, oh, it's too much, because it is, but it also is, you know, it's a blessing. I feel very blessed to be in the position that I'm in today, you know?
Absolutely. When you got your first job in games, which was Bayek, right? It was Bayek in
Yep.
Assassin's Creed Origins.
Yep.
Did you ever imagine that you would be here?
No, absolutely not. You know, the thing is, again, it's like, look, I've always wanted to tell stories. I knew that I've wanted to tell stories in some way, shape, or form, be it through acting or either writing. The idea of making a video game may have been like a cool thought, but actually doing it is very different. And yeah, I think it's one of those ones which, you know, made sense at the time, and I just went with it. I just went through with it. And that's what was really cool about this whole process, is that it has been a sense of just following what I felt right, you know?
Mm-hmm. I do. I want to like go all the way back to the beginning and then sort of
Right,
like
let's start there.
chronologically. I want to paint the ultimate picture of like how you got here. So, Bayek, Assassin's Creed Origins. How did you, because your background is in TV and theater, so how did you end up in a video game role? Like, what was that process like?
Yeah, so again, it was one of those ones which I just auditioned for. My agent had a call from a casting director, Amy Hubbard, and Hubbard's cast a lot of stuff here. Be it, you know, actually, the Hubbards cast me my first TV role. Actually, yeah, like they've known them for a while, and so yeah, essentially, my agent was like, yeah, there's this audition that's going on. You know, would you like to audition for it? I was like, absolutely, yeah, sure, why not? It was advertised to me as it was going to be a TV show, but all motion capture. It wasn't even yet. It was like, and it was, I don't even think they did they say it was ancient Egypt? I think they were like, it was like Egyptian. Yeah, they did say it was ancient Egypt. I was like, oh yeah, sure, okay, whatever. And then I remember going into the room and meeting them, and they said, "Oh yeah, the audition is going to be you're going to be using the whole space because it's motion capture. You got to check your body, check how your body's going to work and whatnot."
Yeah,
I was like, "Yeah, sure." I actually really enjoyed it, to be honest, because a lot of the time TV auditions really are kind of very tight. So you end up having to just act here, or if it's theater, it is just using your body, but you're also trying to reach as far as possible and show them that you have the technical skills to do so. This felt like a mixture of both, which was really cool. And yeah, so I auditioned for it, ended up essentially being like, okay, cool. And then they called me back in. It was like a second round. And that was the second round. They actually told me what I was auditioning for, which was, it was the new Assassin's Creed game. And it was for the lead role. And I remember just really trying to play it cool in the room, but I couldn't. And just being like, oh my God, I'm a massive Assassin's Creed fan. This is amazing. Like, I buy Assassin's Creed every year. Like, I was just like going nuts. So yeah, and then I ended up essentially auditioning. At the time, it was Alex Walton Regan was my scene partner who I was reading off, who ends up playing my wife, in Aya in the game. But yeah, and that's essentially how that started. But the thing about the role and what that kind of gave me access to, because we were filming in Montreal, and I was on that project for a good 2 years, like 2-3 years, like for a while, because it was the main game and then it was the DLC stuff. And what it gave me access to essentially was the offices of Ubisoft, and like seeing that these games are how these actual games are being made. I was like playtesting as well. I was like,
That's so
actually
cool.
in the, it was amazing. Like I was playtesting, and I was getting constant updates. Like, this time the playtest had my voice in. So that was really surreal. And it was like, these elements were like, oh, okay, this is how a game is made, and like how they make it. And then talking to the developers about it, talking to the writers, the programmers, the artists, the audio engineer team. Like, it was really enlightening to kind of be like, oh man, there are people behind the making of these pieces of art. Because I think, again, you kind of really forget that when you look at, like, for example, film and TV and even theater to a degree. You've got the director, you've got the actors, you've then got like the costume designers, the musicians, like you know of them. Everyone knows of Hans Zimmer, everyone knows of, like, Christopher Nolan. You can see these faces, but with games, a lot of the time you don't, apart from like Kojima, right? For example.
Yeah.
Or like the people who lead, like, PlayStation or Xbox. Like, you rarely ever do. And so this was like my sort of first experience of seeing the people behind the games, seeing the game makers. And I think like that was what was really, that I think was where the seed was planted of where I was going to come to where we are now.
That's wild. Beyond giving you sort of this idea of, oh, this is how games are made, how did that role sort of shape you? How else did your time on that shape you?
Yeah, I mean, that role was the first project that I was on for longer than, be it like a week or, not even, like a week or two. This was the first like big substantial role where I was playing like a lead character. So one thing it did is it gave me confidence. The idea of leading a project, it taught me about setting an example for then other people who would join on the project later down the line. Because again, it's like, I remember being in a position where I'd just kind of rock up on a TV show or a film or whatever, and I do my little bit part and then I move on. But I always felt comforted by either the lead I'm working across or the director or whatever. So there was a real sort of responsibility that was given to me there in that regard of like, okay, I'm going to be the person who's on this project for the longest than anyone else. So I've got to really kind of set a nice example. So that was one thing. I think also, as I said, like the confidence that it gave me, this idea that this team, this studio had basically said, hey, this multi-million-dollar project, we are now allowing you to be the face of, to a degree. And like, that was like, oh, okay, you actually respect my craft. That's really cool. Like you value me enough to sort of be in that position. So that gave me like a lot of confidence. And yeah, I'd say like overall, it just sort of taught me about the power of essentially storytelling through games. Like I knew, the game medium was a powerful storytelling sort of conduit or unit, but the ability of being able to dive into a character, make them my own, play with them, and to as much as I've wanted, was really, really cool to kind of express and explore.
So when you were moving on back into television projects and sort of other projects, I'm betting this was just constantly something in the back of your head that you were thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, always. I mean, the thing is, it's like, and I always say this, like, Bayek was, and the getting the role and being on the job is probably like, I feel like my personal peak because
Oh dear.
it's like, honestly, like I've never felt like I wanted something so much and felt so proud of doing a job so much than I have doing that role. And like, doing the other TV stuff is all well and good and everything, and I enjoyed them. But there was something about being in a game that I truly loved and enjoyed, and being not only in it and a part of it, but also being able to play it. Like it was just so super cool and super dope,
Yeah. Being in it from start to finish. It's a blessing when we get to work on something like that for so long, from start to finish, from ideation to finality. Because I feel like so often, especially in this industry, people project hop, jump from project to project. And so not very often you see something through to the end. So it's great when we get the opportunity to.
Yeah.
I've read, every interview where you talk about how like you made a studio. Like I think you did some interview that was like how to start a game studio with no experience.
Yeah.
But I want that like the granular story of like the day you woke up and decided I'm going to do this thing. Like who did you call first? Like who'd you call first? How did you go about like that?
Oh man. I mean, the thing is, it's like, so after doing, Bayek and kind of enjoying that, and sort of it had its like life, and I moved on. I was doing a TV show at the time. I think I was doing Jamestown, which is actually, funnily enough, where I met Ben Starr.
He gave me the shirt, actually.
Well, brilliant.
Our mutual friend.
It's funny, actually, because so I know I always say this, but like Ben is one of those guys where I knew him from drama school, but we kind of didn't really talk about games until Jamestown. So this is like 3-4 years after kind of graduating, where we were just like, oh my God, we're both massive gamers. And so we kind of now seeing where he's at now is amazing. Anyway, but the thing is, it's that journey of deciding like, okay, I'm going to start a studio. So I'd been nominated for a BAFTA for Bayek, and what that gave me access to was more developers, more people to talk to, more ideas of like, actually, how do you do it? Because I've always been interested in how things are made. I love it. Like I'm really kind of fascinated by that, be it either film, TV, theater, like anything. So games was almost like, oh my God, I love games. I want to know how it is actually made, And so the idea for starting a studio, I kind of, it started with this idea of wanting to make a studio that could do film, games, theater, and all this sort of stuff. Like that started quite early on. But the decision to have our first thing be a video game came at when I was in South Africa at the time, and I had just played, I think I was in South Africa, and I was playing Ori on the Nintendo Switch, and everything just clicked, and I was like, this needs to be made into a game. This is the game. This is what the game is, what I want to make. And so the conversations that I started having was with everyone, and I'm not even exaggerating. Like it was literally everyone: producers, writers, actors, audio engineers, publishers, like everyone. Like I was like, okay, how do you make a studio? I've got this idea for a game. Where do I start? And they're like, okay, cool. Everyone has an idea. Maybe start with like an idea of a prototype. I'm like, what's a prototype? They're like, oh, okay, here we go. Well, you got to do, you've got to make it like, you got to decide what your, what's that core thing that makes it feel good? So I'm like, okay, cool. So then I go back to the drawing board and writing down these ideas of what I think would be really cool for this game, this idea of grief and exploring grief. And I come in, with these scratchings to a programmer who I was introduced to, and I was like, "Can you make this?" And he's like, "I'm busy, dude. Like, I ain't got time." I was like, "Come on, man. Like, please just help me out. Let's just try this." The core thing is about switching masks. Like, I just want to be able to feel the switch, because I started with like the idea of holding a controller. At the same time, I'm asking, who else do I need? Oh, well, you'll need like a designer. So I'm like, oh, okay, fine. I got to find a designer. So really, truly, it was this whole thing of like, it wasn't necessarily this thing of like, I'm going to start a studio today. It was like, how do I make this thing come alive? I'm going to learn as I go along. As I'm doing this, I'm talking to my acting agent, and he introduces me to a lawyer, for example, who deals with like, actors' contracts and whatever and whatnot. And he's like, but he does video games. So then I'm talking to this lawyer. I'm like, okay, how do I make a game studio? He's like, well, have you got any contracts in place? I'm like, contracts? What? He's like, you need people to sign something. I know, literally. And I'm like, oh God, okay. So we get contracts in place, and then after getting contracts in place, he's like, do you have any NDA sort of forms or anything like this? Do you even know, like, do you have insurance? And I'm like, oh no, right, oh okay. And I'm genuinely like, this train is moving while I'm sort of laying the tracks down, as I'm getting concept pieces and art from artists that I reached out to on ArtStation when I first asked them, like, oh, how do you put a character in a game? And then suddenly they're now doing the concept pieces for the game, the idea that I had. Like, it's literally, honestly, the journey of how this whole thing started was a chaotic mess. At the same time, I'm talking to like producers who are at studios and getting their advice, and they're like, dude, don't do this. Game making is crazy. Like, it's so hard. It's a thing. And then I remember even distinctly talking to Mike Bithell and being like, buddy, I want to make a game. And he's like, buddy, don't.
That sounds like Mike. That sounds like
you know what I mean? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was very much a learning to run while I'm not even walking kind of thing. And that's, I'd say like that was the beginnings. The beginnings really was this core team that, I had agreed to kind of contract on, when I got the contracts out there, for like, a couple hours a week, to kind of get something started. And it just sort of snowballed from there.
That's wild. So wait, you had people contracted and you were just kind of working on it was it part-time for a while?
Yeah, it was part-time. I think well, I'd say part-time / full-time. Like, it was very full-time for me. It was in between jobs. So it was we'd just sort of like, in my eyes, we'd just finished, I think it was like episode 1 and 2 filming of Raised by Wolves of season 1. And because Ridley Scott's a machine, he finished War so early, and so it felt like, and it was actually between the gap of sort of filming that of 1 and 2 and coming back for 3 and 4, I believe, was when everything, COVID kicked in. I think, it was. I can't remember. Like, it's so hazy, but like, it basically, essentially, what ended up happening is, between when I wasn't basically doing a take, I was working at the game studio. And when I was waiting for like a job or waiting to hear back as to when we're going back in, I was working at the game studio. Everyone else was full-time.
Okay. So were you like physically meeting with people, or did you guys do everything full remote?
So this is the thing. COVID moved everything to remote working. So we all were remote based, and we were going to essentially, like, in my head, we were always going to be a remote studio because it just made sense. Like, people can work from home, like it's possible. So like, in my head, it just made sense that way. It was then when COVID kicked in was when it became like a thing. It was like, oh, okay, we are now just going to be completely fully remote. Like, I was definitely meeting with people here and there and everywhere, but I'd say, the first time that I met, almost like the majority of the studio was at our first ever Christmas party. So like, that was like, and that was the first time we met everyone. Like, it was almost like making friends online and then suddenly meeting them for the first time. And you're like, oh, you're a lot shorter than I thought you were. But like, it's that kind of thing. So it's like, so that's essentially how it all kind of came to be what it was,
Yeah. So when you were looking for, you said you found a programmer, a designer,
yeah.
There's so many interesting sort of bits and pieces to Tales of Kenzera. The music is very specific. The art is very specific. So when you were looking for those musicians and those artists, like how did you approach that search? Because I know there are a lot of games that have very rich cultural foundations and backstories and there's always a challenge to making sure you're representing authentically, that it sounds correct, it looks correct, it's authentic. So how do you approach that sort of search?
Yeah, so for me, it was really important to reach out to, for example, African artists.
Mm-hmm.
So Godwin Akpan was the first concept artist I reached out to in regards to kind of giving him these ideas and being like, hey, could you make this into a thing? So like he was, someone that I reached out to on ArtStation. Then followed through with another guy, a Nigerian artist called John Zeno, then went down the route of Timo Mayer as well, and Ibrahim Idris as well. Like they basically, again, just reaching out to these people who I thought were really cool just through ArtStation. And, because that was apparently also another thing I didn't even realize existed was ArtStation. And like, that was someone, when I asked like, okay, how do I get art? Like, who do I talk to about art? It's like, well, you should go through ArtStation. I'm like, what's ArtStation? And then suddenly I'm now looking through all these different profiles being like, oh my God, they're cool. And that's kind of how that started. And, even with the musician and with the composer of Nanita. So I'd heard of Nanita's work beforehand, and I really, really, really liked it, really loved it. And it was almost like a bonus as well that, she was African, essentially. Her parents are, of African descent. So I was like, oh, okay, this is dope. I'll just approach her. Like most of the people I approach basically are like the first people I've gone to, and they've kind of been like, yeah, I'm down. And then they just, they work with it that way. Like it's been very surreal. And as I say, like I was very much learning as I was going along, and kind of getting sort of elements of structure as we were kind of building and as we were working on like it was very surreal that the team building, I ended up essentially, I think I ended up sending at least sort of over 300 plus emails to developers, just being like, hey, do you want to come and, join at this studio, or you want to, come and work on this game, or how do you start a studio? Like I sent a hell of a lot. And like, that's probably just alone on like ArtStation. Like everything else was kind of on top of like, it was so much work.
Yeah, you were managing that yourself. Like you were the creative vision behind the game, assembling your team, but also you were the person like sliding into everyone's DMs, being like, "Hello."
Pretty much.
That's a lot.
It was a sliding of DMs thing, man. Like, and it wasn't, and then nowhere could run away, man. It was either Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, ArtStation, like everywhere.
My God.
Everywhere. I was so active. I've never used LinkedIn before, and I was like, right, I'm gonna learn how to use it now. Like ghost connections, man. Like it's like, and the thing is, it's like the weird thing about it as well, right? Is what makes it even harder to a degree is, I'm an actor. Most people would have known me from Bayek or, Raised by Wolves, or something like that. And so you're getting added by this actor on LinkedIn. Like, what? And he's now saying that he wants to make a video game. This sounds like a scam. Like, do you know what I mean? So, and it's like, you're not going to meet me face to face because it's COVID. So why are you going to so this is the thing. So this is also something that I had to wrestle with.
Oh my God.
This idea of convincing people that I'm not a scam artist. I am really who I am. It helped when I had a blue check mark because then people could know that it was me. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Holy shit. Oh my God. You were just like, here's a link to like an episode of Raised by Wolves. That's me. I'm a real person.
That's who I am. Yeah. So it was a real, it was very much a sense of like, I think I was driven by this idea of knowing that this thing had to happen.
Yeah.
It had to happen. It had to be made. I'm just going to figure it out on the way.
That's very inspiring. Like it's hilarious, but it's also just so inspiring. Like that unwillingness to kind of to just get it done. That unwillingness to let it go, to just get it done.
Yeah.
So one of those groups that I don't know if this was a DM slide situation, but you collaborated with Critical Role.
Yep.
What was that like?
So so this is one of those ones where like, so again, I'm very much of the mentality of, I'm a big believer of, if you're going to build something cool together. Like it's always, yes, of course, there is such a thing as too many cooks in the kitchen, but ultimately though, there is something to be said about the creativity kind of bouncing off elements and whatnot as you go along. So Critical Role, I had worked with them on The Legend of Vox Machina, which was good fun. They were fans of Raised by Wolves, so we ended up just talking after recording, and then I was telling them that I've got this idea, I've got this game, I'm making this game. This is the heart of it. This is the soul of it. This is what I want to do with it, and this is mainly with Travis. And what ended up essentially happening was I was like, okay, I'm learning how to build a company. I'm learning how to build a studio. You guys have got a company which is very, very friendly, very lovely, and a community of people that love you. How do you do it? And what ended up essentially beginning as like kind of an early conversation of like, oh yeah, well, we built and started here. We did this, we did that. Ended up essentially becoming like actually maybe like a mentorship in a way, like
That's
a partnership.
lovely.
And like, and learning from them about storytelling, about community, about building a sort of foundation of something that is driven by the people, and also by the people that you're working with. And I think like that was what was really cool. And so that's how that partnership ended up happening. And, alongside that, funnily enough, because I'm filming Raised by Wolves at the same time as making this game, I'm then talking to the creative group, Ridley Scott's creative group, about what I'm doing, because they've never thought about like the idea of making a game. Like, no, they'll do adaptions or whatever, but making a game, what? But the beautiful thing that they are good at doing is bringing these story worlds alive, is bringing these universes alive. And consistently they do this. You look at Alien, you look at Blade Runner, even Gladiator to a degree. Mm-hmm. And I think like there was something about their storytelling prowess on a visual sense. And, especially when it comes to filmmaking and TV, that, and also Luke Scott, who's who runs the company. He's the CEO of it, but he's a massive gamer. So it was like it just made sense to kind of share this knowledge. And their partnership essentially ended up helping me make my my first short film, which I directed and written, called My Shoes, Your Feet. Mm-hmm. And they taught me what it meant to essentially direct and work behind the scenes in a film sense. So like that's really how these partnerships worked and how they are. And to me, they were massive players in regards to where we got to today. Just because, again, like if it wasn't for their knowledge and for their sort of aid and support, wouldn't be here.
That is such a lovely, like heartwarming, like beautiful story. I feel like there's no, for real. I feel like as someone who has again came into development through another door as well. I used to be media. It can feel sometimes like there are like not necessarily gatekeepers, but just gates.
Yes.
That feel insurmountable, that like maybe people feel like there's a limited number of keys, or like it's not really something to spread around and share. So when I hear stories like this about people who are great at their craft and who are just like, oh, you want to do it? Like, come on in. It's so refreshing to hear.
It is. And I'll, honestly, the best people I have worked with have been those type of people who've been very open about stuff like this. Like, because they've got nothing to hide. They've got nothing to sort of gatekeep. In a way, they are literally just like, yeah, if you can do it, cool, great, let's do it. Let's all do it. Let's all kind of flourish in this art form. And I think like that's, and those are the kind of players that I want to surround myself with, because you then grow faster, you learn more as you go along. Yeah,
absolutely. Also, game development is terrifying, and
it's
nice. It's nice.
It's tough.
Have these people, with you, and have people to lean on as well.
100%. 100%.
So moving away from how it got made to the game itself.
Yeah.
And I know what you're going to talk about, but for the benefit of this beautiful podcast audience, what were your biggest game inspirations when you were putting this out together?
So definitely like Ori and the Blind Forest.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big player. I think there was a feeling specifically in Ori when it was the waterfall sequence where you're trying to get out of it, and it was.
Oh yeah.
I kept dying, man. I kept dying, and it was really hard. And like, don't get me wrong, I've played many multiple games, and died a lot and whatever, and moved on. But you kind of always felt like it was this thing of like, that was on me, or the game. Whereas this waterfall sequence, I don't know what it was, but it felt like a synergy of both in a way of like, it's on me, and the game got me. And after completing it, there was this feeling of elation that I hadn't felt for a very long time. It was, which was essentially this. The last thing I can think of was completing. There's a level in Sonic on the Mega Drive where it's the casino level.
Oh my God!
Yeah, it was brutal. And I remember.
PTSD?
Oh man! But I remember completing it, and with my dad, and feeling really great about it.
Yeah.
And so I was like, that was the same feeling I got. And I was like, oh, okay, great. And then, that's a big inspiration. Another inspiration was Kingdom Hearts.
Yes.
And like,
yes.
Yeah, man. Like I'll be real, man. Like that game, like had such an impact on me growing up. And I think I think for the rest of my life, I'll always be paying homage to it. Because it's so instrumental to a lot of things, to the stories that I like telling, to the stories that I like consuming. Like it just, it was amazing. And and that was the first time I was introduced to a character who was vulnerable, but also a hero at the same time. It wasn't this burlesque man or this kind of like cool lady who's got their shit together. Like this kid is literally, he's thrown into this thing. Like he doesn't know the only thing he's driven by is getting his friends back. Like that's all he wants. And like, there's this massive destiny that is ahead of him. And so like that was really cool. And I thought that was something that really kind of inspired this journey, because again, it's like, I guess to me, it's like grief. The idea of being thrown into this huge world that you have no idea about and that you can never get out of. You can never escape it. You are in it, and you're in it for the rest of your life. And so that was something that I really, that was really inspiring. And then Devil May Cry is one of those games where it just feels fun to play. It feels cool. It feels kinetic. It's the same sort of vibe I get when playing like Hades or even Dragon Ball Z Budokai. Like it was this feeling of like just fun action energy. And that was a massive inspiration to Zao, because in my eyes, all these elements and shades carried a sense of what that journey of grief is. The kind of the chaos of Devil May Cry is almost like the chaos of grief, and not knowing what emotion is going to hit you. You just have to kind of get with it and kind of go with the flow as it kind of goes along. Elements of like of the Kingdom Hearts, kind of thing of this destiny, this idea, this big world, as I mentioned, is this idea of being thrown into a world that you have just no control over. And then the beauty of what Ori captures is this artistic brilliance, but at the same time, this sense of loss, this sense of kind of this world is ready to consume you at any moment. And these were and of course there are other other elements that kind of inspired Zao to the fruition of it, but those were almost like the core bases of where I wanted to pull from.
When you were putting together the combat, what specifically sort of brought you to that idea of you wanted to feel that switch, and you wanted that duality? You've talked a lot about how fighting with the sun mask and fighting with the moon mask are two very different styles, and how they both are meant to be. So where did that come from for you?
It really came from this. So it stemmed from this idea of wearing many masks, especially during the journey of grief. Like the conversation and talk that I have with you is very different to the conversation I have with my mother, or the conversation that I have with, even my mother is a different conversation that I have with my agent. Like I'm having to wear these different masks very quickly and have these very different kind of dialogue with people very quickly. And it was very much for me highlighted during quite recently after my father passed away, this idea that I had to put my professional face on and do that. Then I had to go home and kind of take that on board. And then when I'm talking to friends, it's a very different mask. And so for me, the switching between the masks was very important to capture from the get-go, but also having their own individual personality as you sort of explored that. Originally, it was actually going to be more than 2 masks. It was going to be 4. But because I wanted to capture, again, this idea that you're flipping between many different multiple elements, but you can also use them at the same time. But then we realized on a mechanical, technical level, it was quite tricky without having a weapon wheel or something that, allowed you to kind of switch and kind of pick. But that ruined the flow of what I wanted to capture and what we wanted to kind of explore. So for me, it was very much like, okay, cool. Let's then go down to 2. Let's look at the two masks that you switch between and build and play it from there. Because ultimately, again, the important aspect that we wanted to capture was the feeling. It was the idea of what the player is going to be feeling. And so having these 2 different, polar opposites in a way, playing against one another, but also playing with each other at the same time was something that I wanted to find the harmony between.
How did it feel when you played that for the first time and it was like working, like your prototype?
So good. And I'm very hands-on. Like I want to try and test everything as I can. I was even learning like what it meant to get into the engine, what it meant to even start pushing changes. I know it gave the studio a bit of a heart attack and frightening moments. Definitely.
Did you play in Perforce?
We didn't use Perforce. We were using Git. So it was so it was really like, okay, Abu, please don't break this. Here's your own branch. But it was, but that's essentially what, I ended up doing was, really kind of getting into it and feeling it. And the thing is, and the thing with game dev, as you probably know, a lot of it doesn't happen until it happens, right? Until it's all there. So, we'd get the functioning of it right. Okay, but it doesn't feel right. And then you get the animation in and you're like, something's missing. And then you get like VFX and you're like, yeah, okay. And then suddenly sound comes in and you're like, oh, okay, now this is feeling it. And then they tweak something on the design front. You're like, right, this is it. This is it. So you need all these elements to kind of mash together, but you can't build all the elements and mash them together until you know what you're building. So it's like, it's this kind of weird amalgamation of this stuff. And that's essentially how it all came to be. And it felt good when it started making itself work. It felt really good.
Yeah. I love the feeling of just seeing something working, even when it's in like gray box, like just being able to just see it after it's been living in your brain for however long.
Yeah.
It's so good. How did you, and you talked a little bit about this when we talked about music and art, how did you approach weaving your representing your cultural and all of those nuances into what is essentially a game? Like a game has a lot of gamey stuff in it. So when you think about your source material and the just the things that you wanted to convey, how did you approach bringing those elements in?
Yeah, I think again, it was one of those ones where at its core, really truly this game is about the journey of grief. That was what was important. And we had to kind of capture that in the best light as we could, narratively, as well as mechanically to a degree. When it came to weaving elements of my, my own culture and the stories of, what my father would tell me and the kind of the Bantu myths and legends, it sort of, it was one of those ones where it just made sense. Like it just had to be, like, okay, what are the adversaries that Zhao will face? Well, it's shades of grief. Like, what are the shades of grief? Well, you've got anxiety, you've got fear, you've got anger, you've got the self to a degree. Like, you've got all these elements there. So then you look at then stories within, Bantu myths and legends of monsters and creatures that kind of have these shades. And you're like, that's a really cool one. Like, that's a really interesting, the Impundulu, for example, the lightning bird, the storm, this idea that, the calm before the storm, with this feeling of like kind of everything's kind of anxious is being held until the storm releases itself. Like, that makes sense to kind of make this as the kind of the first boss to a degree that you kind of face. And like, yeah, it sort of just naturally lent itself. And you ended up realizing that as you built this world and as you were building this sort of story and this in this sense of this journey of grief, everything else almost was like additional, you know? The idea of it being set within a Bantu space. The only reason why we set it in a Bantu space was because it was honest to, again, my father and to me and the stories that he would tell me. And it was that whole thing of like, right, okay, if this game is going to be about the journey of grief and be something personal, let's make it personal. Do you know what I mean? And so bring it from my perspective. So it kind of just all sort of naturally informed one another as we went along, but it was all formed by the core, you know, feeling of like, we want to make it this journey of grief. And so, yeah, that's sort of how it all came to be to a degree.
That's really cool. Did you do the writing on it as well?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it was me and my best mate. And my best mate essentially. So what the thing is like we had many passes at this writing, right?
Of course.
And we had like as you always do, and like we had like people coming and going as well when it came to the writing element of it all. But at its core, it was me and my best mate, and because again, my best mate, he was able to kind of look at it from an external position, but he knew my father. Like, we grew up together. My dad would, and his parents also would take us to school and back like every day, when we were like 14, 15, 16, like, you know what I mean? So it was like, we've grown up with one another, knowing each other's family, and he knew my father from his perspective. And I, obviously I was taking it from my perspective. Yeah. So we ended up essentially creating and conjuring this experience, this world together, which was really, really cool. And yeah, that's sort of how it all came to be. And keep in mind as well, we've never written for anything before. Like,
wow.
Like, this was the first ever piece of writing we've ever done together officially, and kind of been like, yeah, this is us.
Wow. Holy shit. So you started the studio, creative direction. You were in you were recruiting as well. You were also basically the recruiter, and you also wrote. How do you balance that?
I don't know. I don't know. I've definitely Dr. Faustus something over here. Like, made a deal with someone, because it just, I think, the thing is, it's like, the way that I kind of see it, again, it's like it all comes from the same space of wanting to tell a story. It all comes from the place of storytelling. You're just using different vehicles and different, tools in order to do that. And so that's kind of what I was led by. There was a lot of trust and faith that was put onto the team, especially like the leadership team in regards to like programming, even like the design element, and all that sort of stuff, to be like, okay, can this work? Can this not work? How do you do that? How do you communicate that? There was a lot of faith that was put in there, but ultimately, again, it was all driven by wanting to tell something that's honest and truthful. And I think that's what made it easy,
Yeah, it does. It is a lot easier to rally a team behind something that everyone kind of believes in, than it is to have like this, someone come in and be like, here's my idea, execute on it.
Yeah.
For the decision to make it a Metroidvania, I know we've talked about Ori, but is that your favorite genre?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
okay.
It isn't. I'd say like, and the thing is, it's like, what's funny? Like, I don't even know if I have a favorite genre. I think I kind of just enjoy games. And I know I say that, and I play anything. I'll play anything and everything. And I think like there's something really great about that, because it's a bit like watching film. Like, I'll enjoy and love a Marvel film, but I'll also watch, Oppenheimer. Or then, at the same time, I'll watch like a small indie film. Like, it's like I kind of enjoy trying anything and everything, because I think like you can gain a lot from actually, playing and exposing yourself to as much as you can. My go-to sort of game, like, it varies and changes. Like, you know, I can play, you know, Hades one day, but then I can go and play like Grease another, like, you know, or even Stray. Like it just depends on my mood. And I think it depends on, and that's very much like a book or like a film, you know? And I think the reason why I kind of went down that sort of Metroidvania route is because for me, that was the best vehicle for as a genre to depict the journey of grief, because you're throwing a character in a world that they have no idea about. And it's, you know, as you kind of, and even though it provides you with all the tools to, in order to kind of deal with it, you have to find them. You have to figure them out. You're always backtracking. You always feel like you're taking steps backwards, but actually you're really taking steps forwards towards that kind of goal. And it's a world that you will sort of get comfortable with. Like, that is a Metroidvania through and through. Like, it couldn't have been a roguelike, because the roguelike is all about the death of the self and growing from the death of the self. Whereas this is the death of someone external. An open world, it invites exploration, but there isn't this necessarily feeling of danger. There is a feeling of like the great expanse. There's almost like this kind of adventure to it. Whereas Metroidvanias almost feel like, here you are, oh my God, survive. And that's essentially what grief is. Grief is it kicks into a survival mode, because it makes you realize that you're not mortal. Immortal, sorry. You're not immortal.
Yeah. Even though you might be playing as immortals. And,
as an immortal, exactly.
Stuff like that. All right. Hard pivot. You and I have talked a little bit about this, but now that you have done, so you have seen multiple entertainment industries, essentially, how things start from the ground up, TV, film, games. What do you think that games can learn from TV and film, specifically not about making the game itself? Because everyone, you know, I don't want to talk about Quad A today, but what can games learn about, you know, how teams get made, how teams get put together, how you approach sort of building something? What do you think, like, games can learn from the way that TV does it?
That's a good question. I feel that it's about respecting the medium in which you're in. So that's one thing. I feel like if you're going to make you can see this, like, there are some shows out there that don't need to be shows. They kind of drag on. They should have just been made into a film. There are some films out there that kind of are just sort of short-cutted and short-ended, and you can see that they've kind of cut corners and it should have been made into a TV show. I think it's the same thing with games. Like, respect the medium in which you're in and kind of build into that. And I feel like TV and film have kind of got that quite well. You know, a lot of the time you watch TV, you watch film, and you kind of like, yep, that makes sense. Yep, that makes sense. Yep, that makes sense. Sometimes you play games and you're a bit like, that should have been a film, or that should have been a TV show. Like, what are they doing with this, right? In regards to like, so I think that's one thing. I'd say another aspect that could be learned is essentially, might be a bit controversial, but hey, we're here. Respect your team, man. Unions,
that's not controversial at all.
Like, unions, man. Like, you know, the thing that I love about like the TV and film space, and don't get me wrong, like, there is some harsh practices in the film and TV space, but man, people are protected. Like, yes, you know, and I think like that's essentially something that I feel like as an industry as a whole needs to kind of be done a bit more of. Like, I think, you know, that especially in the times of today, like, it just feels like, yeah, it just feels more so a sense of it's gonna be okay. You feel a bit more, even though the industry of film and TV is kind of like helter-skelter in regards to you don't know what's going to happen here, there, or everywhere. There is a feeling of a bit more security rather than necessarily than it does a bit on the game side. But like, yeah, I would say like that is, you know, a big factor, and the machine of film and TV, even though I feel like it's sort of slowed down a bit in regards to it's kind of found its way and there's still some changes that needs to be made. I think the beauty of the game space is that it's still very young and still can be shaped and formed by the people in it. But yeah, it's a tricky one. But I think like, yeah, I think that's something definitely that the film and TV space do have very well is almost this feeling of security to a degree, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that feels very Hollywood to me about your situation with Tales is your collaboration with Critical Role, because
Mm.
it was sort of a another studio like mentoring, helping, like in a
Yeah.
dialogue with you, essentially being like, yeah, this is what we know, here's how we do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like we don't like that's a very and like entertainment TV film thing to do. It's studios
Yeah,
collaborating on each other.
and you get that a lot in film and TV, like
Yeah.
studios helping and working with one another in order to kind of deliver the same thing. Like it's all towards that ultimate goal of telling a really good story to the best way you can. And I think like as we sort of move, I think we're evolving into this space of you can't do everything yourself. You need help, and by accepting help from professionals is the best way to go about it.
Yep.
I knew for a fact that I couldn't necessarily design to intricate details or give the ideas of what I wanted in the design fashion. I could have attempted it, but I'm not necessarily going to do a good job at it. So you get a professional to do it. So like, it's almost like, yeah, there was a real importance about doing that. Even like when it came to doing the short film, like, even though, yeah, it was very much guided by, Ridley Scott Creative Group, it was important for me to be like, how do I do this? Rather than be like, I'm just going to try it just for the sake of it, because I don't know what will happen, and just sort of go on with it, and even when it came to the forming of the studio, like it was me being very open to people and being like, I don't know how to do this. What do I do? And gaining the help of other people to kind of build this thing along.
That's so beautiful. I'm still so like, that's a very heartening, very hopeful story. Again, kind of going back to what we said earlier about how it can seem almost impenetrable at times to get in.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
The thing is, it's like, it's so weird because it's just that whole thing of, I find, and I know that they say this, like, oh yeah, you can learn as much as you can online. There's like YouTube videos and all this sort of stuff, but nothing beats talking to people, and actually gaining their individual experience and sharing that, because, and even though their journey isn't necessarily your journey, it's still a journey to kind of learn from, and it's still something to take from. So yeah, it's a very interesting space, man. Like, it's a very sort of funny place where it does sometimes feel like it is shut off, but at the same time, there you can always find a way in. You'll always find a way in.
Yep. I tell that to all of my mentees. As you know, the industry is in a weird place right now. So
Yeah.
whenever they'll call me and they'll be like, how do I, like, I'm not going to get in. Should I give up? I'm like, no, you'll find a way in. Like,
Find a way.
Don't give up. Do not give up. Sort of on that note, and you kind of touched on it already. Now that you've seen this industry from multiple sides, you've been a voice actor. Now you're a dev. So you've seen, and you've talked to everyone. So you've seen all of it. You've done the wheeling and dealing, the recruit, like all of it. What is something that you are sort of thinking about, like, about the industry right now? I know we just talked about how we need to unionize. Everything's kind of in a weird state, but what do you think we can do better? What should we keep our eyes on? Like, to you, moving forward as a game developer, obviously going on to make more things. What are you thinking about?
Supporting each other, man. Like, that's it. I think that place can still be bolder and still be better. Like, the thing is, it even though the industry, even though the industry is like amazing and beautiful, oh man, you can feel so isolated and alone in this space. And I think, it's one of those ones where, I guess, the thing that the film and TV space does very well, for example, is it respects the art and enjoys the art. The business side of it is almost like, it's only if you're interested in it.
Sure.
Whereas in the game space, it's very, very important. It's very kind of a thing. Like, did your game make like, X, Y, Z, or did you sell like stupid this or whatever? And it's like, actually, man, like, it's just about the art form, man. Like, I'm not trying to chase a zeitgeist here, And look, don't get me wrong. Like, I think, players are very good at, championing and respecting, games. right? In regards to like, you know, from the art and from the heart and everything. But I think as an industry as a whole, there's always this feeling of like, no, it's just me. I got to shut it down and just do my thing. And I think like that's something that I feel like actually we need to be communicating more. We need to be sharing more. We need to be learning from each other more, not necessarily hiding from mistakes. Because that's the, you know, you learn from mistakes, man. And so it's fine to make mistakes. So, and given the space to make mistakes. So yeah, I think like that's essentially something that we could definitely, you know, learn as a whole. And I also think as well, like it's also this sense of respecting it as an art form. I think, you know, that's something that I feel again is it's there, but it's kind of like, oh yes, little indie darling, and then you move on to like the big live service because that's what it's all about. And it's like, no, it isn't, mate. Like it's actually, that's just one side, you know. It's like a Marvel film. Like, don't get me wrong, love Marvel films. Marvel films are great, whatever. Yeah, sure, but yeah, you know, sometimes I get a bit tired of it. You know what I mean? Like, yes, it's like, come on, man. Like, let's see something else. So I think there's something that we can definitely kind of learn from. And also, I think as well, like, again, it's funny now being in it and kind of, you know, being a part of it. It's this sense of, I feel, I also think that there is this, again, it might be controversial, but it isn't. There is a real monopoly of where you can find funding and where to get your game made.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's, sure, okay, that's right what it is. But actually, you know, the beautiful thing about film is that you can find 101 different ways of getting something funded. Like, there is no right or wrong way. There are grants, there are people, there is everything. And the way it works as well is like, we know that we are putting money into an art form that might not necessarily come out with anything. It'd be lovely if it did, but ultimately we know that we are just fueling and supporting the arts because there will be something that will always come back out at the end of it, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like, and maybe this is just a games thing, but like I feel like with the games, it's more of a, it's very businessy. It's very like a business transaction. It isn't about the art; it's about the business, and it's about like, you know, what can you actually offer me that is no one else can offer me, and it's like, yeah, you know, and there's like, and there's a small pool of that, and I feel like actually. And this is something that I've really wanted to do, is like the more you open this stuff up, the more you kind of talk to other people about games, the more, and I use my sort of like bunny quote here, is like mainstream it.
Yeah.
The more people are interested to actually invest in this space and learn more about it and kind of build upon it. Because I think that's what's really cool about the film and TV space. I think, and by doing that, you then actually allow more people into the games industry.
Yes.
And I think like that's kind of how you play it, you know?
I agree. I think our industry can do a lot better in terms of training the next generation of craftspeople. And yeah, that's definitely top of mind for me moving forward as well. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today. I know you are so freaking busy, so I appreciate you so much.
It's been, you know what, and this is the thing, like, I love this industry and I love it and I love making games and I love it all. And I think that the reason why I truly love it is that it's because there's so much potential and there's so much beauty in it and the people in it are beautiful. And it's like, you could take so much.
Yeah.
And it's like, I could see the potential of it all. So I'm just like, come on, man. Like, let's we're at a weird time at the moment. And it's like, it doesn't have to be this weird, you know? But
yeah, I do.
I guess it's like a growing pains, man. I don't know. But like, yeah, but it's, you know, the thing is that my journey has been beautiful and I've really, really enjoyed it. And it's blood, sweat and tears, man, or blood, sweat and pixels, as like Jason might call it. Like it's been all of that, man.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of developers in this, you know, everyone's getting laid off, things are shutting. I think looking at your story and what you've been able to accomplish is the beacon of hope. We can do it. We can all do it.
We can do it. Yeah. We can do it.
We can do it. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.